Good evening, everybody. I am Abby Dauber-Stern, Director of Makom, the Jewish agency Israel Education Lab. First, I just have to say how excited I am about the number of people who are on tonight from really all over the world. We've got, I think, Sweden and Australia and the United States and Israel and several other countries. I also want to say how excited I am. This is our sixth salon, sixth of six, the final one in the series. And for those of you who don't know, Jonny Ariel is my predecessor in this position as director of Makom, and it's really a pleasure to be able to be leading these salons together with Jonny. So thank you, Jonny, for being here. I'll just say a word about Makom, and then we'll jump right in. Makom develops content and educational strategy for the Jewish agency and beyond. We focus on Israel education and peoplehood education. And one of the most interesting things I think we've done over the last few weeks is that each one of the conversations we've had, each one of these salon conversations has been with an Israeli voice and a voice from outside of Israel, usually from North America. And to hear those two perspectives, particularly in this time where our world has both shrunk in so many ways and also expanded in so many ways, has been incredibly important for my own thinking and about education, about what's going on in the world right now. I'll say that if you should all be on our email list already, and we should have your emails, but I want to let you know that in the next few weeks we'll be coming out with both some new content and a new book edited by Jonny Ariel. So stay tuned for that. It's already up in the Amazon store and Kindle. If you search for Jonny Ariel and Israel Education, you will find it, but you'll hear more about that. And with that, I really want to get started. I want to thank Osnat Fox. Osnat, wave to everybody. You'll hear from her probably later. Osnat has been the producer of all 6 of these salons. And any question you have about these salons, if you have had trouble accessing past ones, they'll be up soon on some of them are already up on our website. There will be others up shortly. You should be in touch with Osnat. And we are here to talk education anytime you would like. And with that, I'm going to hand it over to Jonny. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are. I'm Jonny Ariel, an educator, and in these times, and in these times of pandemic, I'm looking to have stimulating conversations with a range of voices from around the Jewish world, with those who can share their experience and expertise on issues beneath and beyond the news headlines. This week, our salon conversation is about education. Even as the death rate from COVID-19 continues to rise, there is much movement to return to some routine. While summer camps and educational travel plans have been severely disrupted, some schools, some youth movements and synagogues have moved online, and there are initial stages, at least in Israel, of going back to school. Like so much else in our lives, these times give us the opportunity to look candidly at ourselves, our achievements, and our shortcomings. I'm delighted to be joined today by 2 comrades, co-professionals, spirited folks who labor in the fields of education. Dr. Miri Shlissel from Jerusalem and Dr. David Bryfman from New York to discuss redesigning Jewish futures. Miri is the head of Pedagogical Affairs in the Ministry of Education, effectively, if you like, Israel's chief education officer. Her career is including founding the Or Torah High School for Girls, serving as a national supervisor for Bible studies, and conducting evaluation and planning for the Rothschild Foundation's educational programs. She holds a PhD in Bible and is a graduate of the Mandel School of Educational Leadership. David is the Chief Executive Officer of the Jewish Education Project in New York. He's worked formally and informally in Jewish education in Australia, Israel, and North America. He earned a PhD in education and Jewish studies, focusing on teen identity development. He's a founder of the annual Jewish Futures Conference and at the forefront of researching Jewish teens in what he would really call Generation Z, but maybe he's called upon to call Generation Z. And he is a graduate of every fellowship going, senior educators at the Hebrew U, Wexner, Schusterman, and Leading Edge. So welcome, David. Welcome, Miri. Welcome to all our listeners. Welcome to the Makom Salon L'chaim. So my first question to you, David, is how's your milieu? What's going on? Things
Hi,
are very tough in you.
Yeah. Hi, Jonny. Hi, Miri. Hi, everybody. Firstly, I should say that I don't normally get nervous in front of these sorts of things, but then I saw some of the names popping up in the chat, many of whom are some of my teachers. So when that happens, it always is a stepping back moment. Look, I'm in Brooklyn, in New York, and I haven't left really my 4-block radius in about 10, 12 weeks now. And it's it wears down on you. It's depressing and things are tough. And we know many people whose family members have been sick and people have died. And I've attended more Shiva calls online than I care to name. It's tough. And then our work goes on, and that is our bright spot as well. That the milieu that I'm living in right now is the mixture of my immediate block radius of where we live, and then also we have reached more Jewish educators in the last 2 months than perhaps we have ever reached in the 100-year-old history of our organization. And the number of interactions I've had with Jewish educators is really stimulating and really inspiring. So it's a bit of like two sides of the same coin happening simultaneously. And I would admit that the hardest part actually is juxtaposing life between that balance. Not always so easy to do.
Thank you. And Miri?
Well, since I work in the Ministry of Education in Jerusalem, we had to switch from Friday to Sunday, from teaching as usual to teach from distance. And it was, this is something that we were talking about, and we discussed it, and we thought about it, and then suddenly it happened. And when it happens, everything looks different. And you ask yourself the question, what should I do? What to take care of? To take care of the youngest, to take care of those who have to have the matriculation this year, to look at the teachers, to look at the parents. Suddenly all the world around us is combining in different ways. You work from home, and then you see all the kids of the other people pass away, and suddenly they don't have any more patient to hear the parents keep on talking in Zoom, which is our mutual world right now. But on the other hand, you find yourself people that are doing terrific things that you never dreamed that will happen. And you find yourself meeting people without long planning, a month ahead. You're just picking up the phone, and people from different places are gathering around the Zoom and suddenly talking about things that took us years or a month or weeks to gather to speak about, and then suddenly we start speaking about it. And it's amazing. It's very different, and it's very difficult, because I miss all those conversations between people that are not in the meeting, but are between the meetings. And our life is too much focused on the meetings themselves and doing things, and all the things around become less part of our life, and this is hard.
Yeah, wow. I mean, I'm struck by the contrast, David, when you said that your institution is 100 and something years old. It strikes me that it's older than the Ministry of Education. Maybe that was obvious to others, but it just struck me now that that's the case. I want to ask now about, it seems as though coronavirus, COVID-19, has expanded our sense of common humanity. I don't think there's ever been anything as global in my lifetime. Something that truly has reached everywhere. And one can therefore wonder, why does being Jewish matter? I grew up with a rhyme taught to me in my Jewish supplementary school. How odd of God to choose the Jews. It's not so odd the Jews chose God. And address the theological or leave it aside, whatever you want. But among the range of options of how to live in the world, I want to ask, why should one choose to be an active Jew? Miri, what do you answer to a young Israeli who asks you, why should I be active as a Jew? Why should I explore being a Jew? I'm an Israeli. I'm a citizen of the world.
In Israel, the question hardly raises, because you're a passive Jew in Israel. You're born into it. I think that this is something that when you live abroad, you really challenge this question almost every day of your life. But in Israel, the question itself doesn't appear that much. Therefore, it's a different challenge to create this kind of commitment to be an active Jew when it is so usual to be a passive one. Therefore, the question is how to create this activity. And I think that in these days, one of the interesting things that happened is that a lot of things are being changed. I see it beneath our home in Jerusalem. There's a big yard, which is quite empty usually. And in the Shabbat evening, on the last few weeks, people gathered around and start praying, doing Shabbat prayer of Kabbalat Shabbat. And it becomes something that is part of the neighborhood. And people came from the balconies and downstairs, and suddenly things were not separated. You didn't say that women are here and men are there. Younger people do not disturb the prayer of the oldest one. Everyone had the opportunity to share. And I think that this is something very strong about being Jew in Israel, where things are very unfortunately sometimes moving at narrow angles. And this is an opportunity to open things and think once again, because actually one of the questions is, if it happens all around the world, what's unique about us? What's unique about our kind of solutions? Is it national solutions of the state? Do we think about something that, what happens when Jews in New York are suffering that much? Does it mean something for us? This was a point of asking the question of what's the meaning of being Jew right now? Are you more familiar or more empathizing with Jews in the States that they suffer that much, or is it something global? And this was kind of a question that raised the understanding that it is something important of being a Jew. And it matters when other Jews in the world are suffering. And for once, it wasn't us who suffer and have to create to struggle alone against the world. Suddenly, it's something that comes from all around, and Jews in other places are suffering, and suddenly it changed things. And I think that one of the important things is this Corona created a shift. What we were talking about, moving the cheese, it moved a lot of things that forced us to think once again about things that we actually never thought of. And this is an amazing experience. But how, and one of the things I'm asking myself, and we are asking ourselves, how to make it keep on going, this different kind of thinking, when the Corona, with God's help, will leave us. Can we keep some of the things that we learned from it.
Thank you. Wonderful. David, let's ask the question of, well, what would you say to a young American Jew who says, David, why on earth should I explore being Jewish? Why should I choose to be a Jew?
Look, so I think your question, the premise before the question is just important, at least for me to touch on for one moment, and that is all of humanity going through this corona at the same time or at the same speed, and is it truly a universal phenomenon? On one hand, we could say yes. On the other hand, I have never felt more distant and from other people in my Jewish space when my Israeli friends tell me they're going back to school this week and I might not be going back to school for another 6 months, or my students might not, or my children. Or when the Hasidic neighborhood less than a kilometer away, less than a mile away from my house is still having some sort of funeral service en masse. Who is my people, who is not my people is a really important question. Who I feel closest to right now. I think that premise requires some sort of, at least for me, an internal exploration. Look, my grandmother, 94 years old, is a Holocaust survivor. She never asked the question about choice or that never comes into her mind. For her, the only question that's ever mattered through her entire life is it good for the Jews? It didn't matter what we were talking about. If something about Jewish people or Israel came on the news or the radio, we knew automatically as a family that we all had to be especially quiet. And we had this special connection. And I used to joke that whenever my family was traveling around the world, they had this like synagogue radar that would just draw them to the synagogue no matter where they were in the world, because that question was just the only question that really ever mattered. And I can understand it and I can really try and empathize and relate to it. But the question of choice, especially outside of Israel today, and I think it is one of the defining characteristics which differentiates the Israel from other communities, it's less about choice for me and more about the freedom of choice. And having the freedom to actually make a conscious decision is really, really central to what it means to live, at least in the Western world, when it comes to one's Jewish identity. The way I try and frame it now for a young person is that if once the question that generations were asking was, is it good for the Jews? The question we're now asking is being Jewish good for either oneself, one's society, or for the world at large? So instead of, is it good for the Jews? Now, is it good for oneself, the community, or the world at large? If Judaism can't answer those questions, I think we have a very, very poor chance of being able to convince or to establish relationships with young people today, because I think that value proposition is a really important one. Now, I happen to believe we do have a lot of values, wisdom, tradition. We also have the added benefit that being Jewish is actually a cool thing in the Western world today, despite reports of anti-Semitism on the increase. People enjoy being part of this Jewish cultural phenomenon. So in that sense, I would just ask a young person, explore who you are, explore your background, explore your identity. And there's this general ethnic or tribal pride, which is coming through loud and clear. Our kids aren't running away from being Jewish. It's actually something which is contributing quite positively to their lives.
Well, that's great. I want to push you onwards a bit, David, and say, well, you've spent significant time in Israel, on the Makom, the Hebrew University, numerous visits as a participant, as a madrich, a leader, and as a staffer and a director. With the Israeli Jews that you've met, whether they were here or you've met in your various places in Australia, St. Louis, or New York, which are the three unknown figures of American Jewry or world Jewry that you think should become household names for all Israelis?
I'm reluctant to give a name, but let's just focus. I think every Israeli Jew needs to experience Jewish summer camp. And I can call that counselor at summer camp any name I want them to. Let's just call them Miriam. Let's just call them Miriam. to see thousands of Jewish kids every summer experiencing the joy of being Jewish with their friends, with culture, with music, is a very, very jarring relationship for someone who's had a connection with what being Jewish means, associated with a particular type of orthodoxy, which is highly connected to a political structure in Israel. And to see kids free and enjoying Judaism in the light of a summer camp, I get you to meet any camp counselor any time of day. The other person I would get you to meet would be my local rabbi, my lesbian rabbi at my Reform congregation, where I go to only a few times a year, but I am there every Yom Kippur for Yizkor as well. And to see that sanctuary filled with thousands of Jews, literally, coming together in joy and in sorrow in that environment is testament to the oppositional force, which is the reality that many Israelis still cling to, that Jewish life in the diaspora is disintegrating, disappearing, that all Jews are marrying non-Jews and therefore not raising their kids Jewish. It's just not the case. There is vibrancy here and creativity here, which is absolutely phenomenal. And I guess that's the last people I'm reluctant to try and introduce any Israeli to, because, you know, statistically, I'm not normal, right? I get that. I went on Makom, you mentioned, right? But my kids are normal. They're not raised in a normal family, but today they are celebrating Lag BaOmer in a digital environment with some sort of crazy color war, talking about Rabbi Akiva. And last night they're asking me questions about Shimon Bar Yochai. Like, these are not abnormal kids in the way that it's possible to live a vibrant Jewish life here. And I think that's a really important piece. Now, I just say one thing, which is, I think, important. You might say to me, Jews were saying the same thing in 15th century Spain and in 1930s Germany, and all of the stuff that I'm talking about is some sort of mirage of history. Maybe I'm wrong. I'm not. We're not going anywhere. Jews have always lived a vibrant life outside of Israel, and I don't use the word diaspora like specifically here. But in many ways, the only difference between me living here now or in St. Louis or Australia and the Jew living in Israel, the only difference is that my grandparents made a choice at a particular point in history to go left to Australia rather than going to Palestine at that point in time. That's a choice that my grandparents made. I don't regret it for a second. But in that regard, we are more similar than we perhaps often think, but some of the distinctions are really real as well.
That's great. Thank you. Miri, let's ask the reverse question.
I would like to relate to what you said, David.
Yeah, please.
At the end,
please.
okay?
And add in too, which of the three unknown Israelis, either from history or today, that you think should be household names for world Jews? So
I was thinking about particular names, but since David was talking about figures, I thought that maybe describe it as a figure is important, because this will make the difference between what you're saying, that all of us are the same. We are the same, definitely, but there's a difference. I'm talking about a small, very important and inspiring group of young men which are holding the responsibility of being rabbis of kibbutzim datiyim in Israel. And one of the names that I'm talking about particularly is the Rav Eli Ofran, which is the rabbi of the Kvutzat Yavne, which is a very old tradition kibbutz in Israel. And he is the grandson of Professor Yeshayahu Leibovich. And he learned to be a psychologist, and then he learned to be a rabbi. And right now he serves as a rabbi in a kibbutz. Now, being a rabbi in a kibbutz is a very unique position, because you have a community which in a way chose you, but in many other ways do not really believe that you have something to say about their lives. And you have to be able to look at a range of issues and challenges that I don't think any rabbi in the world can challenge him about. How do you what do you do with the crafts in Shemitah, and how do you and what do you do in Shabbat with cows, and how do you milk them? And what do you do with people that have different kind of problems? And how do you create the tradition of a kibbutz and make sure that people, that some of them are really related to halacha and some of them are not? How do you help them be one community? And in a way, the kibbutz rabbi is holding in his hands the real world of halakha, which includes all the issues of life at the same time, at the same place, and trying to figure out what does it mean to be a religious Jew in modern Israel, in the entire environment of life. Therefore, I think this is very unusual, very unique, challenging, and he's a young man, and I look at him and I see others in those kibbutzim, and I say, these are the figures that make me optimistic about Orthodox, modern Orthodox life in Israel. People that are really concerned about halakha, deeply obligated to it, and see the world from the angle of putting halakha in the right place of life. So these are the kind of people that I wish all Jews in the world will know and be able to meet and understand how precious they are and how strong they are in what they're doing, because they're dealing with different kind of questions. I would like to give another two names of women, let's say that. One of them is, I think, is not unknown. Her name is Adi Altshuler, okay? And she's a phenomenon. The girl, when she was 16, and my oldest boy is 16, he's in her age, so I looked at her, and he's talented, but you cannot compare her to anyone. What she created in her life are things that are really precious, and I think that it stand of deep Jewish values about looking and taking care of the young disabled. On the one hand, she created a youth movement for young disabled kids, which if she heard me say disabled, she would probably hate me for that. So I'm just describing. And on the other hand, she created what we call Zikaron Basalon, which is a tradition that she invented about putting in the salon, and you're not, Johnny, you're not creating the first salon, putting in the salon in the night of the day for the memorial of the Holocaust in Israel, survivals that speak to young people in the salon and telling the story of their life. Something so simple, so powerful that she created. And I'm thinking about the range from youngsters that have problems till people that came from other places, from the Holocaust, and her ability to touch the heart of people and make them active. She demands all of us to be active and to do things with our identity, with our tradition, with our world. And she calls for action. And the third figure, I'm sorry, I'm talking too much maybe, but the third figure is Professor Sarit Kraus. Okay, she is a professor that responsible in the Bar-Ilan University for the artificial intelligence sector in computer science. She's religious, quite a very religious woman. She has 3 kids of her own and 2 adopted. One of them is coming from a girl from Ethiopia, and because she thinks the word is has, oh, you know, she's very talented. She works in the States, she works in Europe, but she's so modest, and she's so committed for those different kind of aspects of life. The one that in your own house to take other two kids because you think they don't have a place and you want to be their place, and on the other hand to create an artificial intelligence. And I'm thinking about the human intelligence that she has, and I think that these are kind of people that make me, as I said, very optimistic about what Jewish life in Israel can offer to people from all around the world.
Thank you. Yeah, wonderful stories from both of you. I want to now, as opposed to touching on something where we can each see in the other something of perhaps a value, a virtue, I want to now touch on something which is much, much tougher. Politics shapes lives. Part of the idea of Zionism in its most fundamental way was for Jews as a collective to take power back into their own hands. But politics divides Jews, certainly here in Israel and in the US and all over. But it's not only between Democrats and Republicans or Likudnikim and Meretznikim. It is also a fault line that you can possibly see between liberal Jews, wherever they are, and let's say conservative Jews, wherever they are. I want to ask you, David, how should education deal with politics? Should we embrace politics and explore it with young people and talk it through and role play it? Should we avoid it because it ends up risking something about the collective nature of the Jewish people, a sense of solidarity? Or should we minimize it and put it in its place? What do we do with this in deeply, deeply divided societies that seem to be all over the Western world? David?
Yeah, so let me start with just a statement or an assumption that we're all good educators out there, and we know that all education should be age appropriate. So the answer I'm giving now, I'm going to allow you to make the judgment as to whether you're bringing this into your gun or your kindergarten, or whether you're dealing with 12th grade students or adults. That aside, look, I'm from the school which believes that all education is inherently political, and it's as much as what we do talk about and we don't talk about, that whatever we're doing is a political action. When I was studying at NYU, they used a classic definition of education, which stuck with me, which was basically, and this is coming from a government system primarily, education is the transmission of knowledge from one generation to the next generation, or at least knowledge and skills. Some people have taken that one step further and said that knowledge and skills from one generation to the next generation in order to perpetuate the adult society in which we live. And the converse of that, I grew up in a youth movement whose primary principle was we critically and independently reevaluate the adult society in which we live. But if we take as an assumption that education has always been there for young people to learn what adults think they ought to know, then we can never really avoid the fact that it's always been inherently political. And therefore, I think it's our duty to embrace the inherent difference, or the inherent possibilities that allows you to do. What I mean by that is, being political doesn't mean politicized. And being political and allowing young people to reach their own conclusions, or adults to reach their own conclusions through their own experiences, through the multiplicity of what's possible, I think is a paramount virtue in Jewish education today. Primarily because the converse I can't accept. The converse is some track all the way going towards some form of indoctrination, which I can't accept as a plausible purpose of Jewish education. So I guess what I would try and say in this question is that if Jewish education is to be relevant in the world today, and to prove its inherent worth and value to humanity, it must contemplate and embrace the current issues that people are struggling with, and that includes the very political struggles that you're referring to. If we avoid that which is most important to young people today, we run the risk of being completely irrelevant. if we don't believe we have what to say on the most important issues of today, I actually think we are irrelevant. So do I want Jewish education in North America to be talking about climate control and gun control and upcoming elections and divisions between Jews and Israeli politics? I see no other alternative. Well, the alternative is actually going out of business. And I'm not prepared to accept that. So my simple answer is we have to embrace politics. We have to do it carefully, but to avoid it that would be the biggest mistake.
Thanks. Miri?
Well, I must say that asking this question in this evening it makes me a bit sad, because in Israel there's going to be a government soon, hopefully, and no one asks to be the Minister of Education, which is very poor for me. Really, I think it's a problem that in a way lights the politics in Israel in a certain way, because I think that politics means, the real politics means to take a stand, to struggle, to say what you believe in, and what are you willing to pay price in order to fulfill. And this is about being a politic. And what I'm seeing is that youngsters in Israel, sometimes they have opinions, but they don't really have the ability to explain, to stand for, to argue for their opinions. It's very the conversation, the political conversation in Israel is shallow, and this is a compliment. Therefore, what I dream of is youngsters that do know how to challenge others and how to express themselves in political issues, about being here, about doing things which are issues, and in a way to express. I'm not afraid of opinions. I'm really afraid and worried about the lack of opinion, the willing or wishing to just live life without any meaning. And when you don't have what to say about your life, this is the problem. It's not the politics is not the problem, but the problem is that politics in Israel, and I think all around the world right now, sounds as something something that decent people maybe want to avoid, and I think this is a bad education for youngsters. They have to see that the advantage of standing for your opinions and fighting for them and discussing them, and not giving them up because saying an opinion is something problematic. That sometimes this is the way it looks like when you look at the arguments in the community, in the society in Israel and all around the world. I don't think we're unique in this. I think we're all. It's in a way it's like the corona. We're all in the same place, and we have to struggle the same struggle of making our life more meaningful and worth fighting for.
I saw a Gallup poll a little while ago, can't remember quite when, which asked about professional integrity in the eyes of the public. And the profession which was deemed to be worthy of the most integrity, the most credit, were nurses. And I think the coronavirus epidemic has only borne that out for all of us. And the profession that had the least rating on an integrity scale were politicians. Ultimately, I suppose we get the politicians that somehow we deserve as populations. But it's a tough call, because finding people, young people, who would wish to get their sleeves rolled up and get stuck into politics locally, nationally, internationally, Seems to be a really, really tough ask at this time. Yeah, I want to ask everyone who's listening to now look at a poll. And obviously it's simplistic at a certain, but just to get a reckoning from all of you. What's the purpose of Jewish education? And you're welcome to explain your choice in the chat, and you're welcome to choose multiple options. Is it to develop a sense of individual meaning? Is it something about Jewish continuity, collective continuity? Is it something about repair of the world? Is the purpose of Jewish education just give the parents a bit of a break? Right? Thinking about all these cries. I suppose you saw that viral video of the mother desperately responding to the online education. Or is it all of the above, or is it something else? And please enter into chat. What do you think is the purpose of Jewish education?
Half of you have voted, so keep them coming.
And feel free to, please, when you've finished with the poll, add into the chat the names of the people who you think Israelis should come to know, be a household name, or vice versa, who American Jews, British Jews, Australian Jews, world Jews should come to know in Israel.
Okay, about to close the poll, so get your last comments or last vote in here.
Okay. So hopefully you can all see those responses. 62% develop a sense of individual meaning, 76% something about continuity, 27% repair the world. No one believes in helping parents. Just speak to Abby, David, Osnat, and everyone else here, and whether that's true or not. And then the others, it seems to be something about text and tradition and access to the heritage. And Robbins are saying, fascinating that the liberally enlightened educational class still go with continuity. Aha. Very good. So, David, just give a response to the poll, a quick analysis.
Look, I want to say one thing about parents. We were, as a family, facing our first 3-week break from our children in 10 years. And now that summer camps have been cancelled, we no longer have that 3-week gap. This is not a breather. This is something which has become part and parcel of American Jewish culture and Jewish life to such a large extent. It's really difficult to explain even to my Australian friends what summer camp has become to symbolize or be a part of in the American Jewish psyche. It's far more than a breather. It's a chance for kids to come back, refreshed, better versions of themselves, happier Jews in general. There's something about that summer experience which is just only palpable once you see it taking place firsthand. So I just don't want to diminish that giving parents a breather. It's not necessarily as quaint as it might first appear to be. There is something deeper there which I would like to explore further moving forward as well.
Thanks. Miri, your stand-up analysis. Commentary.
I think this is so so Jewish to say almost the same way that we're talking about individual and collective. And because we're all individuals, and I think that those days are really challenging our individuality on the one hand, and at the same time we are a collective. We are collection of people. There's something very important about all of us being being together, doing something together. Look at this salon this time. We're all kind of different individuals that spend an hour together about something which is common for all of us, and perhaps is really important enough for us in order to spend time around it. Therefore, I think that Jewish education is really about finding yourself and finding your family, your big family together, the collective family of us all, and being able to recognize that maybe there are parts of the family that you do not like, but it's still your family. And on the other hand, you have to demand that they will acknowledge you as an individual, although you're not their cup of tea. Therefore, this is a mutual understanding and obligation of the community and the person at the same time. And I think this is about being Jewish.
Wonderful. Thank you. Can you close the poll now, please? And thanks to everyone for their comments in the chat. Please keep adding as we go on to our next question. It follows straight on. Socrates was reportedly famous for saying, "The unexamined life is not worth living." That only by reflecting, thinking, exploring, do you actually come to a view, you as an individual, as to what is worth living. So I want to wonder as to how might this best be accomplished. Should the curriculum be individualized? I mean, we certainly have the technological means today to tailor-make everything for a market of one. Or should there be a common core that all Jews, wherever they are, should learn, even if it's modest? If so, what should it consist of? And why should we have a common core? David.
So I hope I'm not giving away any trade secrets, Jonny, but you did give us some of these questions in advance to prepare for. And this one stumped me. I didn't know how to respond. And I was really troubled by that, because on one hand, I know that all education needs to be individualized. I know multiple intelligence. I know people learn in different ways. I know my two kids learn in different ways. And yet everything we do in Jewish education is focused on these group experiences, often at the expense of the individual, to the point where it's sometimes conformity, which is the norm that we expect people to just to adapt into this given situation. What troubled me even more was that if you had asked me when I was a madrich in Habonim Dror the answer to this question, I could have given you a core curriculum. When I was teaching in a day school, I could have told you what the core corpus of Jewish knowledge ought to be, or a Hillel director, or running a team program. And now I find myself at this 30,000 foot position, or however many feet. And I guess my answer is that it's really setting dependent, and I'm agnostic. That if more people speak Hebrew, I'm really happy. And if more people speak Yiddish, I don't know if I'm any less happy. Or if more young people are watching cultural pieces of American society and pointing out Jewish references because that resonates with them, or they're reading more Israeli literature, I think I'm agnostically happy about all of those things. And for me to start demanding a core corpus of Jewish knowledge or experience, I think that's going to be counterproductive in the world today and push a form of orthodoxy, small o, that I think we've gone beyond that as a people. What I would
give
say,
up on an expectation of Seder? Give up on an expectation of Yom Kippur?
if people find other ways to come together as a family, then I'm all for it. If it's the one night where everyone's doing Pesach differently, I mean, this year there were probably more individual and different Sederim around the world than any other time in world history. On any given Friday night now in America, there are probably more Jews attending more services than ever before. Do I like the fact that they're doing that time-bound? Yeah. Do I care about the content? No. So maybe I'm pointing towards the shell needs to be some sort of traditional holding piece for all of that. I would say the point which is more important for me than exactly what they're doing would be I need all educators to do whatever they're doing or whatever they're putting out there with some form of intentionality and some form of measuring whether they're going to be successful. So just letting people by happenstance fall upon the experience which then they deem to be meaningful, well, that's a whole lot of Jewish experiences. And all of us students of Jewish education or education know that the true learning only comes once you've had the opportunity to reflect upon that experience. So I'm not saying that any type of Jewish experience matters and that equates to Jewish education. It's some form of learning, but for it to be constitutes an educational experience, I think my core would be, I would love to have some sort of facilitated process that allows reflection to take place, that enables the individual learner to make the meaning for them, which makes the most sense to lead their lives.
I'm waiting just to let that drop. Miri,
Well,
what do you make of it? The individual versus the collective, you know, one of the ways of casting what American society is, it's an individualistic society. One of the ways of casting what Israel is, it's a collectivist society. So if you believe perhaps that education should be countercultural, then American Jewish education should be collectivist and Israeli Jewish education should be individualist, or perhaps not. Where do you stand?
First of all, it's for me, it's a professional question because I'm responsible for the national curriculum of Israel. So it's not hypothetical. We struggle with this question every day about what should be part of the national curriculum and why, and what shouldn't be and why. Therefore, it's a big issue. I think that the Jews in the States or all around the world doesn't have this issue because actually no one decides for them what will be the curriculum. Therefore, every school, every community can choose its own. And in Israel, we really think about the necessity of having a national curriculum. And I, for myself, are really into this question. What should be? Should we make try to figure out the foundations that should be connected to us all and be known by us all, or should we develop individuals? So I don't want to answer, you know, the best way is not to answer your question, but to answer another question. Therefore, I would like to see what kind of texts I would like children, kids, youth, or people in Israel to learn. And I think that one of the main issues is to try not to read it in the beginning as an individual, but as someone which is connected to something bigger than us. I think that a curriculum stands for being part of something. And the idea that everyone decides to have its own beginning, middle, and end is not Jewish. For me, being a Jew is being part of a chain of history of many generations, and I think that curriculum should include texts that speak and relate to other texts. For instance, I will just give one example. I'm not sure that this is a core curriculum, but just to make an example for something is what you said, David. You were talking about Leil HaSeder, and I think that Leil HaSeder is a very individual experience. But I think it's a bit of shame that people will see it only this way and will not know that it's part of tradition and think that happens many years and stood for many generations in different ways. yes, and it has a new approach these days, but it did not appear yesterday. It's part of a long tradition. This is part of being Jewish. And I'm thinking about one of the songs that, 10 years ago when they were choosing in Israel in Yom HaAtzmaut, the song of the generation of Israel, they choose Yerushalayim Shel Zahav. And I thought for myself, one of the things that about Yerushalayim Shel Zahav as a poem is every word there is connected to a different kind of literacy. It relates to the Tanakh, it relates to Chazal, it relates to Piyut Yehudi of Rabbi Yehuda Levi, it relates to the smell in the mountains of Jerusalem, and it relates to the situation. You can argue about the description of the situation. I'm not talking about it politically, but I'm talking about this is something rich. And I think that the curriculum has to be taught, no matter what you choose as the text, has to be taught in a rich way that gives you the understanding that you have to look once again inside things and understand that you're part of a big chain, and it's your responsibility to be the next generation that create the next floor on this huge building that you're part of. This is for me the curriculum.
Yeah, thank you. I think there's a very vital conversation going on in the chat. Ben Jacobs has been involved in a project, and he's sent the link there to try and articulate what might be the elements of a curriculum that all Jews should pay attention to or come to know. Different people have different views, and it doesn't seem to cut easily between conservative and liberals. It's something else going on. I'll just offer the following thought, that if you had to think of big categories that I hear in this conversation have come up, not necessarily in response to this last question. One is Jewish time, that somehow we have to mark Jewish time, however we wish to mark it, but we need to celebrate together, we need to commemorate together. There are ways of doing these things. Each cluster of people or community, whether you're religious or secular or whatever God or non-God you believe in, you need to do those things. You need to mark time. Second is Jewish space. We heard it in reference to the sovereign Jewish space of the State of Israel. We heard it in reference to Jewish summer camp or synagogue or school or JCC or whatever, youth movement, whatever it might be. Some space where there's enough of a majority of Jews that they're able to determine what goes on there. Third, I've heard, and looking through the chat, it comes up again and again, Jewish texts. Perhaps the Torah, perhaps way beyond the Torah, but that Jews, as some kind of curricular imperative, are going to touch on in some way Jewish texts. And fourthly, something about Jewish dreams or Jewish visions. What does all this add up to? What is all this for? What kind of world do we imagine? And that we're going to be able to explore those through an educational program. We're coming to the end of our time. So I want to ask both of our dear friends to offer us a bracha for the Jewish people on this day as Lag BaOmer is coming to a close. And through their bracha to offer a thought as to a policy, a platform, or a program that should be embarked on for the good of the Jewish people. Miri, please.
Since my roots are in the Tanakh, and I think that everything's come from there, I asked Sati to raise two psukim from that I think are my blessed. You know, when God said to Avraham, Lech Lecha, a lot of Poshanim are asking, why was Avraham elected? What made him the one that God choose? And no one, and you know, it's a very good question, and no one knows the answer. So you have a lot of answers, but I think in Bereshit Yud Chet, God is saying, why did he choose Avraham? And what does he expect from him and his people for the generation ahead? And he says, I know him. And I'll read it in Hebrew, and I hope all of you understand, but if not, I'll translate in a bit. למען אשר יצווה את בניו ואת ביתו אחריו, Avraham was chosen to teach his family and his kids from here to generation, ושמרו דרך השם, and what is דרך השם? לעשות צדקה ומשפט. This is derech Hashem that Avraham was committed to walk in, and this is the reason why God is explaining Avraham his judgment about Sodom and Amorah, because he has a mission. His mission is tzedakah umishpat. And at the same, and years later, when Micha is talking in Jerusalem, in the city that that has a temple, and it's built and it's going to be destroyed, and people are not knowing what should they do. What does God wants from them? Does God wants them to rebel, or does God wants them to give up? What does God wants from us? And then he says, I'll tell you what God's asked from you. יגיד לך אדם מה טוב ומה השם דורש ממך, כי אם עשות משפט ואהבת חסד והצנע לכת עם אלוקיך, which means God is asking you to do mishpat and ahavat chesed, which is tzedakah. You have to hold two things in your head as a Jew. You have to do tzedakah as a person, and we have to demand tzedek as a society. And more of all, this is derech Hashem, being modest with your God. You do not know, and you cannot say what God asks you, but you always could know that God is asking the Jewish people to make tzedakah mishpat. And I think that this is our mission. And this is our blessing if we can bring it to the world. This is the base of Tikkun Olam for me.
Amen. Thank you. David.
So the first thing is, the most important news of the day might be that the red team has just won color war at my children's day school. So just to make sure that everybody understands where my priorities are. Look, my go-to text here probably would have been one that I've spoken about many times before and familiar to many of you, that of Janusz Korczak. And for many of us, we know too well about how he died and not how he lived his life as a phenomenal educator and the role that he played, especially in giving dignity to children throughout their lives and towards their death. But when I was scrolling down the names of the people on this call, I thought that I would direct these final comments to the educators amongst us. And I'm reminded here of my go-to text when I'm feeling down, from the book The Courage to Teach by Parker Palmer. And it's a beautiful book. If ever you need a reminder of why we probably all got involved in this profession, vocation, calling in the first place, I urge you to read at least the first chapter. In one part he writes, teaching holds a mirror to the soul. If I am willing to look in that mirror and not run from what I see, I have a chance to gain self-knowledge, and knowing myself is as crucial to good teaching as knowing my students and my subject. And I think it's a good reminder to me that we are who we are for a reason, and that teaching is more than just the transmission of knowledge, but really we're invited to transform the lives of young people, adults, every single day. And in terms of the blessing, what I would say is that look, especially here where I am now, I understand why people's focal point right now and attention is trying to feed the hungry, to try and look after the sick, to offer shelter to the homeless, to take care of our Holocaust survivors. But when we come out of this pandemic, and we will come out of this pandemic, the entire community is going to turn and look to places of Jewish education, culture, and religion to revitalize and bring back to life a more thriving community than we ever knew before. And I think that's for all of us to keep in the back of our minds, that right now we might be taking a step back, but that's in order for when the time is right, that we're all able to take that giant leap forward and bring this community what it truly deserves. So thank you to everyone.
Amen. Thank you so much. I'm reminded of the Talmudic wisdom in Avodah Zarah. Ein Adam lomed Torah ela b'makom shelibo chafetz. The person best learns Torah in a place their heart's desires. And my heart has desired this last hour with Miri and David. And thanks so much for the opportunity. If you have ever the chance, go learn with Miri, go learn with David, go challenge them, go explore with them. Thanks so much for your wisdom and for your efforts on behalf of us all. And that brings us to the end of this series of the Makom Salon. We've explored community and Pesach, nationalism and anti-Semitism, memory and history, Israel's challenges and promises, social justice and responsibility, and now education and learning. It's been a treat to host this series. And thanks to our producer, Osnat Fox from Makom, for making it all happen, and to our sound guru, Yaniv Giladi. This will be available as a podcast very soon. More details on the makomisrael.org website. Until next time, take good care, be well, l'chaim.
L'chaim.
Thank
And
you.
Jonny, I want to take this opportunity להגיד לך תודה, תודה רבה. And I want to share that when Jonny and Abby and I went on this journey of trying to create intimate conversations about things we deeply cared about and trying to figure out the issues that bother us with interesting people, we didn't really know what this would end up being. And I have to say that having so many of you here and having so many regulars who've been to more than a few of our conversations really has enabled this to be an intimate conversation. We would love to continue the thoughts, and the biggest takeaway for me as we end the series and move on to other exciting things is that this coming together from different parts of the world, people with different worldviews and different work, really can create a true difference and can bridge differences in all sorts of ways. So Miri and David, toda rabba for being here, and Jonny and Abby, this has been amazing to be with all of you. And I'll see you all in our next project. We'll keep you updated. Toda. Laila tov, boker tov.
Thank you.